Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today we are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. Scene: a quiet suburb of Seattle, Washington, lived a young nurse named Oriella. She was 26 years old, worked at a local hospital, and was known for her kindness and professionalism. Her colleagues valued her for her hard work and attentive care of patients. Oriella grew up in a middle-class family. Her parents were teachers. She had always dreamed of a better life, but never imagined her dreams could turn into a nightmare. Brooke Parker, a 50-year-old businessman, was the successful owner of a chain of hotels on the west coast of the United States. He had a reputation as a tough but effective leader. Brooke was divorced and had two adult children from his previous marriage. His fortune was estimated at several $1.5 million, which made him an attractive bachelor. Despite his age, Lily and Brooke met at the hospital where Lily worked. Brooke was admitted there with a heart attack, and Oriella was his attending nurse during his Hosel hospital stay. They struck up a conversation that developed into a relationship after Brooke's discharge. Despite the significant age difference, Oriella was charmed by Brooke's confidence and charisma, as well as the prospect of financial stability he could offer her. To outsiders, their relationship seemed strange. Oriella's friends and colleagues expressed concern, but she brushed off their remarks, assuring them she had found true love. Brooke, for his part, seemed genuinely in love with the young nurse, towing her with gifts and attention. No one could have predicted that this relationship would lead to a tragedy that would shock not only Seattle, but the entire country. The story of Oriella and Brooke would become an example of how dreams of a better life can turn into a nightmare, and how the desire for freedom can push a person to commit a terrible crime. After being discharged from the hospital, Brooke began actively courting Oriella. He invited her to expensive restaurants, gave her jewelry, and took her on romantic weekend getaways. Oriella was overwhelmed by the attention and luxury she had never known before. She felt like a fairy tale heroine with a handsome prince rescuing Cinderella from boring everyday life. The relationship developed rapidly. Just 3 months after they met, Brooke proposed to Oriella during a dinner on the roof of one of his hotels overlooking nighttime Seattle. The 3-carat diamond ring cost more than Oriella earned in a year. Without hesitation, she said yes. Wedding preparation took only 3 months. Brooke insisted on a lavish celebration at his country estate. He personally controlled every detail from the menu to the guest list. Oriella felt a bit lost in the whirlwind of preparations, but attributed it to excitement about the big day. The wedding took place on June 14, 2018. More than 200 guests attended the ceremony, mostly Raymond's business partners and acquaintances. Oriella's family and friends were in minority. The bride looked stunning in a dress by a famous designer, but a careful observer might have noticed a shadow of concern in her eyes. During the wedding banquet, Oriella felt the first signs that her life would change, not only for the better. Brooke constantly controlled her interactions with guests, interrupted conversations, and insisted that she always be by his side. When Oriella tried to spend some time with her friends, Brooke abruptly called her away, citing the need to introduce her to important business partners. After the wedding, the newlyweds went on a trip to the Maldives. At first glance, it was a perfect honeymoon. Pristine white beaches, a luxurious hotel, romantic candlelit dinners. However, it was here that Oriella first encountered Brooke's dark side. He insisted on a strict daily schedule, controlled her diet, and even chose what she should wear. When Ariella expressed the desire to walk on the beach alone, Raymond threw a jealous fit, accusing her of ingratitude. Returning to Seattle, Ariella found that her life had completely changed. Brooke insisted that she leave her job at the hospital, arguing that she no longer needed to worry about finances. He also suggested moving into his mansion, located in a prestigious area of the city. Ariella agreed, hoping that these were temporary difficulties and they would be able to find a compromise. However, with each passing day, it became more evident that Brooke had no intention of changing his behavior. He controlled every aspect of Ariella's life, from her wardrobe to her social circle. Ariella's old friends gradually stopped visiting, and new acquaintances were exclusively from Brooke's circle. Thus began a new stage in Ariella's life in a gilded cage where her every move was controlled by a domineering husband. She did not yet know that this was only the beginning of her trials, and that events awaited her that would forever change her fate. With each passing day, Ariella's life became more restricted. Brooke gradually increased his control over every aspect of her existence. He installed surveillance cameras throughout the house, explaining it as a concern for security. However, Ariella quickly realized that the main purpose of this equipment was to monitor her. Brooke insisted that Ariella change her phone number and delete all her social media accounts. He argued that this was necessary to protect their privacy from prying eyes. When Lily tried to object, Brooke threw a tantrum, accusing her of ingratitude and hinting that she might be hiding something. Financial dependence became another tool of control. Brooke gave Ariella a limited amount of money for pocket expenses, demanding an account of every penny spent. All major purchases were made only with his approval and in his presence. Lily's social circle narrowed to a minimum. Brooke did not approve of her old friends, considering them unworthy company. He organized meetings only with people he chose himself, mainly his business partners and their wives. At these events, Ariella felt more like a decorative element than a full participant in the conversations. Even the choice of clothes became a subject of constant arguments. Brooke insisted that Ariella wore only the things he approved. He believed that his wife should look a certain way, corresponding to his status. Any attempts by Ariella to express individuality and style were harshly suppressed. Gradually, Ariella began to lose touch with reality outside their home. Brooke limited her communication with her parents, arguing that she now had a new family phone. Conversations with her mother became rare and always took place under her husband's vigilant supervision. Lily's attempts to find work or engage in volunteering met with fierce resistance. Brooke believed that his wife should not work, as it could negatively affect his reputation. He insisted that her only duty was to be the perfect companion to a successful businessman. Physical violence was not part of their relationship, but the emotional pressure became stronger. Brooke masterfully manipulated Ariella's feelings, alternating periods of demonstrative tenderness with coldness and alienation. This kept her in constant tension, making her doubt her own feelings and decisions. By the end of their first year of marriage, Ariella had almost completely lost her identity. She had become a shadow of her former self, constantly trying to please her husband and avoid his displeasure. Dreams of a happy family life were shattered by the harsh reality of marriage to a controlling partner. One day, looking at her reflection in the mirror, Ariella barely recognized herself. She realized she could no longer live like this. This realization became the first step towards forming a plan that would ultimately lead to tragic consequences. The realization of the hopelessness of her situation didn't come to Ariella Immediately at first, she tried to find a compromise, attempted to talk to Brooke about her feelings, but each such attempt ended in another scandal, after which control only intensified. Brooke skillfully used guilt, making Ariella think that all the problems in their relationship were her fault. Ariella began to look for ways to break out of this vicious cycle. She secretly gathered information about women's crisis centers, tried to contact old friends. However, her fear of Brooke was too strong. She knew he had connections in the police and local authorities. Ariella was afraid that if she tried to leave, Brooke would find her and bring her back, and the punishment would be severe. The thought of murder first came to Ariella after particularly heavy conflict. Brooke caught her on a phone call with her mother, which she was having without his permission. A terrible scandal followed, during which Raymond threatened to completely isolate Ariella from the outside world. At that moment, she first thought that the only way to gain freedom was to get rid of her husband forever. At first, Ariella drove away these thoughts, considering them the product of momentary weakness. But the more she thought about it, the more attractive this idea seemed to her. She began to plan the murder, realizing that it was her only chance for a normal life. Ariella carefully thought through every detail of the plan. She understood that she would have only one attempt, and a mistake could cost her freedom or even her life. She decided to use her medical knowledge. The plan was to gradually poison Brooke, mimicking the natural deterioration of his health. The choice fell on a powerful medication that Brooke was taking after his heart attack. Ariella knew that an overdose of this drug could cause cardiac arrest. She began to gradually increase the dose, mixing additional pills into her husband's food and drinks. At the same time, Ariella diligently created the image of a caring wife. She demonstrated to those around her concern for her husband's health, insisted on regular visits to the doctor. This was supposed to divert suspicion from her in case of Brooke's death. The poisoning process took several months. Ariella carefully monitored Brooke's health, making sure that the deterioration was not too sudden and did not arouse suspicion. She used her medical knowledge to mask the symptoms of poisoning as signs of progressive heart failure. With each passing day, Ariella felt her tension growing. She understood that she was committing a terrible crime, but the fear of returning to her previous life was stronger than moral torments. She convinced herself that she had no other choice, that this was the only way to save herself. The final stage of the plan was put into action on a cold November evening. Ariella mixed a lethal dose of the drug into Brooke's evening tea. She sat next to him, feigning care and attention, while the poison slowly did its work. When Brooke began to choke, Ariella called an ambulance, knowing that help would not arrive in time. Brooke Parker died in the hospital that same night. The official cause of death was acute heart failure. Ariella, dressed in black, saw up at his bedside, playing the role of the inconsolable widow inside. However, she felt a strange mixture of relief and horror at the realization of what she had done. After Brooke's death, Ariella entered a new phase of her plan. She carefully prepared for the investigation that would inevitably follow. First, she destroyed all evidence related to the poisoning, empty medication packages, notes with dose calculations. All this was burned in the mansion's fireplace. On the night after the funeral, Ariella continued to play the role of the grief-stricken widow. She organized lavish funeral attended by all of Brooke's business partners and acquaintances. During the ceremony, she did not leave the coffin, demonstrating to everyone her sorrow and devotion to her late husband. This demonstrative grief was supposed to divert any suspicion from her. Over the next few weeks, Ariella methodically built an alibi. She met with Brooks' friends, telling them about the last days of his life, how he had complained about increasing heart pain. She visited his doctor, expressing concern that she had not insisted on a more thorough examination. All these actions were aimed at creating the image of a caring wife who had done everything possible to save her husband. At the same time, Ariella began the process of inheriting the estate. She hired an experienced lawyer who took care of all the necessary paperwork. It turned out that Brooks' fortune was even larger than Ariella had assumed. In addition to the hotel chain, he had significant investments in real estate and securities. However, Ariella soon faced an unexpected obstacle. Brooks' children from his first marriage contested the will, claiming that their father could not have been of sound mind to leave his entire fortune to a young wife he had lived with for less than 2 years. A lengthy court process began, which attracted the attention of local media. The increased public interest in the inheritance case forced the police to more closely examine the circumstances of Brooke Parker's death. Detective Michael Rodriguez, a veteran of the homicide department, noticed some inconsistencies in witness testimonies and medical reports. Rodriguez began an unofficial investigation. He interviewed the hospital staff where Brooke died, studied his medical record. The detective paid special attention to Brooks' medical history in the months before his death. He noticed that the symptoms described in the medical records did not quite correspond to the typical course of heart failure. Ariella, immersed in the legal battle over the inheritance, did not immediately notice the increased police interest in her husband's death. She was confident that her plan was perfect and had left no evidence. However, paranoia and fear of exposure began to grow. Every phone call, every unexpected visit caused her a panic attack. The situation escalated when Detective Rodriguez unexpectedly appeared at Ariella's house under the pretext of additional witness questioning. His questions were sharp and precise, concerning the smallest details of Brooks' last days. Ariella felt that the detective suspected something but tried to remain calm and stick to her prepared version of events. After Rodri left, Ariella fell into a panic. She realized that the ring around her was tightening. In desperation, she began to plan escape. Ariella gathered all available cash, prepared fake documents. She decided that as soon as she gained access to Brooks' bank accounts, she would immediately leave the country. However, fate had other plans. On the evening before the planned escape, the police knocked on the mansion's door. They had a warrant for the arrest of Lily Parker on charges of first-degree murder. Detective Rodriguez had found irrefutable evidence of poisoning in Brooks' blood that had not been detected in the initial investigation. Lily was arrested right in the bedroom, where she was frantically packing suitcases. The dream of freedom and wealth crumbled to dust. Now she had to face the harsh reality of justice and answer for her crime. The arrest of Lily Parker became a sensation in Seattle. Local media instantly picked up the story of a young nurse who poisoned her wealthy husband. Newspaper headlines screamed about the Black Widow of Seattle and the deadly marriage. The public was shocked by the details of the case, which gradually became public knowledge. Detective Rodriguez held a press conference where he talked about the course of the investigation. He explained that the key to solving the crime was the results of a repeated toxicological examination. Traces of the drug were found in Brooks' blood in concentrations significantly exceeding the therapeutic dose. This discrepancy became the starting point for a deeper investigation. Further study of medical records and interviews with hospital staff revealed strange patterns in the deterioration of Brooks' health, several nurses remembered that Oriella often insisted on giving her husband medication herself, explaining that only she knew the exact dosage. A search of the Parker house brought even more evidence. In a hiding place discovered in Oriella's bedroom, the police found notes with calculations of drug doses and a schedule of its administration. Traces of burned documents were also found in the fireplace, indicating an attempt to destroy evidence. Interviews with Brooks' acquaintances and employees revealed the true nature of their marriage. Many noted Oriella's strange behavior, her depression, and fear of her husband. This information helped the investigation establish the motive for the crime: Oriella's desire to free herself from a controlling spouse and gain access to his fortune. Oriella was placed in the county jail awaiting trial. She was charged with first-degree murder, which in Washington state carries a punishment of up to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Lily's lawyer, renowned criminal defense attorney Jonathan Green, stated his intention to build a defense based on the battered woman syndrome. He argued that Oriella acted in a state of extreme necessity, saving her life from a cruel and controlling husband. The prosecution in turn insisted that the murder was a carefully planned act aimed at obtaining inheritance. They pointed to the duration of the poisoning and L's attempts to hide evidence as proof of the premeditation of her actions. The Lily Parker case caused wide public resonance. It raised questions about the nature of domestic violence, about the difficulties faced by victims in trying to escape toxic relationships. Many women's organizations came out in support of Oriella, organizing rallies of the courthouse. At the same time, Brooks' family and friends were outraged by attempts to portray him as a cruel tyrant. They insisted that Brooke was a loving husband and Oriella was a calculating killer driven by greed. While Oriella awaited trial in a prison cell, her life changed dramatically. From a luxurious mansion, she found herself in a world of prison rules and restrictions. Now she herself was in a situation where her every step was controlled, but no longer by her husband, but by the justice system. Lay spent her days preparing for the upcoming trial. With her lawyer, she had to decide whether to plead guilty in exchange for a less severe sentence or risk going to a full trial, hoping for a quit. Meanwhile, Brooks' children withdrew their lawsuit, contesting the bill. Now that Oriella was accused of murdering their father, they were sure she would not gain access to the inheritance. All of Brooks' assets were frozen pending the outcome of the trial. As Seattle prepared for one of the most high-profile trials in its history, Lily Parker was left to wait and reflect on how her dream of a better life had turned into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The trial of Lily Parker began 6 months after her arrest. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, representatives of public organizations, and just curious citizens. Everyone wanted to see the denial of this drama with their own eyes. Prosecutor Angelica White opened the proceedings with a harsh indictment. She painted a picture of a cold-blooded murder committed out of greed and desire for an easy life. Presented to the jury detailed poisoning plan developed by Lily and described how she manipulated those around her, creating the image of a caring wife. The defense, led by Jonathan Green, presented Lily as a victim of circumstances. Green told of years of psychological terror that Lily endured in her marriage to Brooke. He brought forward testimonies from friends and neighbors who had noticed Brooke's strange behavior and Lily's depressed state. A key moment in the trial was Lily's own testimony. She described in detail the control she was subjected to, the fear and desperation that drove her to crime. Her account was emotional and seemed to make an impression on the jury. However, the prosecution attacked Oriella harshly during cross-examination. They pointed out inconsistencies in her testimony, the thoroughness with which she planned the murder, and her attempts to hide evidence. The argument that Oriella, being a nurse, had every opportunity to seek help, but instead chose the path of crime resonated particularly strongly. After 3 weeks of hearings, the case was handed over to the jury. Their deliberation lasted almost 2 days, indicating the complexity of reaching a decision. The jury's verdict was a compromise. Lively was found guilty of second-degree murder. This meant that the jury believed in the presence of mitigating circumstances, but did not consider them sufficient for a full acquittal. Judge Marcus Gray sentenced Lily to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In delivering the sentence, the judge noted that this case demonstrates the complexity of the domestic violence problem and the need for more effective mechanisms to protect victims.